Hi, everyone. I'm Gret, co-founder of Conscious Working. And this week, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our Wellbeing webinar guest, Jen Fisher. Jen is the Chief Wellbeing Officer at Deloitte. And few can claim to have more involvement in any company's health and wellness program, transitioning it into a holistic and impactful well-being strategy. Jen has also pioneered the conversation around mental health at work, one that launched Deloitte's mental health program and has had a huge focus on creating positive behavior change for employees everywhere. Jen, having gone through her own burnout, now seeks to infuse wellness into every aspect of her life, whether it's around sleep, more exercise, even digital detoxing. I'm so excited for this conversation. I know I'm going to get a huge amount out of it, and I'm sure you are too. Jen, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Absolutely. It's great to be here.
So we have a lot of ground to cover, but I wanted to start with the company. And you've been at Deloitte a really long time now. So I'd love to hear from you about well-being and when it became more front and central to the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been at Deloitte I just actually celebrated 20 years at Deloitte, which makes me feel really old, but I'm not.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. So, when it became kind of more front or top of mind for Deloitte it's a great question. And so I took on my role in 2015. And so it's been about, 6.5, 7 years since we have really been focused on the holistic health and well-being of our people in terms of culture and empowering, creating a culture that really empowers people to take care of themselves. That said, I would say, prior to that, we've always been an organization that has provided great, tools and benefits and resources to our people. We just hadn't really had somebody in the role kind of focusing on the cultural components of well-being. And so, how it all came about, honestly, was really a combination of personal necessity for myself, and then just kind of a need that, that we saw within our workforce. And so, how it came about for me is that about 7 years ago, I found myself pretty much completely burnt out to the point where I couldn't get out of bed and engage in life or work in any meaningful way. And I was forced to really kind of take a step back, take a leave of absence, get myself healthy and well physically, but also mentally. I was struggling with depression and anxiety at the time. And I mean, 7 years ago, right? These were things that weren't talked about in the workplace. Like, we hear a lot now about burnout, but 7 years ago, nobody was talking about burnout in the workplace. It was happening, of course, but it was one of those things that you kept to yourself. You didn't really ask for help. It just wasn't common language. And so for me, I took that time off, and I became really passionate about wanting to help others not get where I got in order to have a successful career as part of their overall life. And so I went back to my leader, and I was going to resign from the organization because there wasn't a role like mine. And it was actually her vision. And I was in marketing at the time, and it was actually her vision to say, you're not going anywhere. The only place you're going is, kind of back to your office, back to where you came from. Spend some time doing some research, put together a business case, because if you need this, then everybody else at Deloitte needs it. And that was really forward thinking at the time. And I was like, whoa, okay. And so that's what I did. I spent a few months putting together this business case. I, called up many of the senior leaders, the C-suite leaders in our organization. And I said, hey, give me 30 minutes of your time. I want to run an idea by you. And honestly, I thought that I was going to get more, not necessarily pushback, but not as an enthusiastic yes as I got. But that even at the time, there was a really strong understanding between the connection between well-being and high performance. And if you think of an organization like Deloitte, we're professional services. And so what faces off with the marketplace and our clients every single day is our people. And so much of the business case was, if we aren't helping our people be healthy and well in their whole life, then we're really truly sub-optimizing who we are as an organization, and everything we do, and the way that we, work with our clients to solve their most complex problems, but also the way that we work with one another and the way that we show up with one another. And then ultimately, the way we show up at home or with the people that we care most about at the end of the day or the end of the week. And so there was a really strong understanding and appreciation for that at the time. And that's kind of what got us going. And we really also expanded kind of at the time, this notion of, we actually intentionally moved from wellness to well-being. Because well-being is much more holistic in nature. And for us, it's body, mind, purpose, and financial health. And so it's all aspects of what makes up a human being, really, and what helps a human being thrive in and out of the workplace. And, prior to this too, we were talking a lot about work-life balance. We changed a lot of that language because we were working very differently. That's when technology was really ramping up in the workplace. People actually, even at that time, weren't going to the office as much, and our people were on the road. They were at client sites, some were in the office, and some were starting to work remotely. So, even then at the time, the way we were working was really changing. And so, balance was something that for me was kind of this false myth, right? Like I was I was always trying to balance something that could never truly be balanced. And I felt like I was failing. So I was like, okay, we got to have better language. We need better words around this, right? Because words matter. And so we shifted our language away from work-life balance to work-life integration. The goal really to help people design their days, their weeks, their months at work in ways that, they could integrate work into their overall life in a way that was meaningful to them, but that also allowed them to make commitments and do the things in their life that, were really good for, mattered to them and were good for their well-being.
So many things to unpack there. First of all, thank you for sharing that story around burnout. And I think a lot of people will resonate with what you've experienced, especially over the past year. It's obviously a much bigger part of the conversation. You touched on performance, and that obviously C-suite leaders, C-suite execs recognize that there was this link to well-being and performance. How do you measure it at Deloitte? Because it's something difficult to actually have a metric around, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I will say, as part of my business case, first of all, the very first thing, because I do work with a bunch of accountants and consultants, and we love to measure things. So there's a couple different ways to go about it, right? I mean, there are hard kind of bottom line metrics that you could look at. There are healthcare costs and utilization of different benefits programs and things like that. But what's really important to know is that, making a commitment to change the culture to be a culture that supports your workforce and their well-being is a long-term commitment. And so you aren't going to see significant shifts in 1 year, 2 years. You'll start to see them in 3 years. So we've been at it for close to 7 years. And are there things that you can and should do very early on that you will start to see benefits from and you will start to see a change from? Yes, absolutely. But we didn't really start to kind of look at hardline metrics. And I don't believe in a productivity metric personally. I think that that's like, whose definition of productivity? How do you measure it? And is that really what we want to hammer home in our organizations, that we want you to be productive above all else, right? And so if you start to look at productivity measures, in some ways you're sending a message that is opposite of well-being. So we know that people, when they're taking care of themselves, are more creative, do better work, sometimes do better work in less time. But just because somebody can do better work in less time, does that mean we want to overload them with work? Because that's going to create work, that's going to create burnout, right? And so I struggle with a productivity metric. And so I've actually never been asked to provide a productivity metric, which is great. I know that there are lots of people that have done a lot of research, and there are different types of productivity metrics that different organizations use, but it's not one that we use. We do have a couple of different ways. We have an annual talent survey, which we survey all of our people, and it has a number of well-being related questions in it. Things like, Do you feel like the organization supports your well-being? Do you feel like your manager supports your well-being? Who do you go to? Does your team support your well-being? Do you feel psychologically safe to ask for the things that you need? Things like that we measure on an annual basis. But we also do regular pulse surveys for in our workforce to really understand sentiment of what's going on in that moment, especially over the last 16 to 18 months, right? I mean, things have changed so quickly. There's been so much uncertainty. We really wanted to understand, were people feeling supported? How are they feeling supported? What programs were helping them, either, them personally, with their families, those types of things, just because the way we were working and so much had changed. And so we're regularly pulsing our people. And to the point where we've done this for a number of years, our people are very vocal now. If they want something, they're not shy. They will, and that's a great thing, right? Because that gives us a sense of, okay, this is what's important to our workforce, but we also get a sense of what's not important to them. And so it's not about constantly investing money in new things and in new programs, but also looking at programs that perhaps aren't hitting the mark that we can stop investing in and redirect some of those dollars. And so it's not just a constant, I know with a lot of business leaders, you have to look at the cost of things, and that's really important. And so it's not just about constantly investing. It's investing at the right thing, in the right things at the right time that matters for your workforce.
Yeah. And I can imagine that unless you actually speak to your workforce, you just don't know. You could be completely investing in the wrong things.
You could. And there's so much value in bringing your workforce along in the journey, right? Having their voice heard, simply asking them, asking them what matters to them and what they need. Sometimes you can deliver it, sometimes you can't, but involving them in the conversation and in the journey actually gives them a sense of responsibility for what the organization is doing too. And that's a really great thing. And so it's critical to involve the workforce in those decisions that you're making.
So I want to take a step back. When you were first creating the initial program, what did that look like and what did it involve? Once you got the sign off and you got an initial sum of money, I'm assuming, how did you go about actually designing the launch plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so we came up with a strategy and a framework, and I talked a little bit about our framework, which is, giving people a way to really talk about well-being in the organization. Because prior to that, honestly, it wasn't something that was regularly talked about, right? And so coming up with the framework or the language about how we were going to speak about well-being and what that meant for us at Deloitte, but also making sure that it was flexible enough for people to identify the areas in their life where they wanted to either work on their well-being or it mattered to them. And so again, it's, body, mind, purpose, financial health. And so body is really all aspects of your physical health, but, things like movement and exercise and nutrition and sleep and rest and recovery and all those things. And then, mind is all aspects of mental and emotional health, but also things like the ability to play to your strengths more often than not. Things like creativity matter to our mental health, resilience, which has become quite the buzzword during the last 18 months, right? And then purpose for us is incredibly important at helping people understand the connection between, either, discovering their own personal purpose. And once they've done that, what's the connection between their personal purpose and the organization's purpose? And how do you create those ties so that when people show up at work every single day, they understand what the downstream impact is of their work, and that brings them meaning in their work. And then of course, financial well-being and financial health is pretty self-explanatory, but making sure that, we are educating our people, especially ones that are coming right out of college, and, things as basic as how do you create a budget for yourself, all the way through, making sure that you're planning for and getting to retirement in a way that is financially, sets you up to be, financially viable in the future. And so, so we talk about it in those terms, and that really gave people a language to talk about it, which seems very basic, but was very important, because what we learned through a lot of our surveying in the early days was that people really wanted permission, right? And this was a culture thing, right? And so people wanted permission. They wanted to know that this wasn't just an initiative that was going to go away 6 months or a year from now, right? That this was something that the firm was truly committed to, and that if they spoke up and asked for what they needed or took the time to focus on their well-being, that was something that was going to be celebrated, not something that was going to be viewed as a negative in some way, like, they're not as committed, or they're not as higher performer, or they care more about themselves than they do the organization or the work. And so that was really important because, it forced us to step back and say, people want permission. And that actually really bugged me. I was like, why do people need permission to take care of themselves like that? But I get it, right? I mean, the reason for my burnout was because I didn't give myself that permission. And so that really bugged me. And so it kind of was the clue to say, we need to take a step back here and look at cultural norms and things that exist in our culture and our environment that have been here for a long time. And some of them were really well intended at the time, right? Like there wasn't anything bad about it, but the way that we work has changed, and the expectations of our workforce have changed, right? And just the way we're living our lives with technology and everything has completely changed. And so there were a lot of things within our culture that was creating this idea or this notion that people felt like they needed permission to take care of themselves so that it wouldn't be viewed negatively for their performance. And so we did do a lot of kind of that step back and say, okay, what are these things that we need to just dispel and like work really hard to get rid of? Because we knew that we could invest in a whole bunch of programs, but if we didn't have the right culture and people didn't feel that permission and that autonomy, that we were probably going to be wasting a lot of energy and a lot of time and a lot of money. And so the very early days, and we followed a real, we're consultants, so we followed a real change management process, right? Of like, okay, this is how much time is going to take, and this is how much this time is going to take, right? And so following a kind of a true change management process is what we did kind of in those early days.
Got it. And so what were the things that really worked straight off the bat, and then things that might have just fallen away because you saw it actually wasn't having any sort of impact?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I already said, I think creating a common language was really important. Leaders, not just talking the talk, but walking the talk, right? And that was a big deal. Role modeling in an organization, pretty much at every level, whether it's the most senior leaders in an organization or someone that is a team leader. But I view everybody in an organization as a leader of some kind. Like if you interact with other human beings, you are a leader, and other people are looking at you to see your behavior, and we feed off of one another, right? And so having leaders truly walk the talk and be authentic about what it is that they were doing to support their own well-being. Because if I think about it, there were a lot of people in the organization that were taking care of themselves, but they would hide it, or they wouldn't say anything about it. They would kind of log off or disappear for a couple hours, but they wouldn't really say like, oh, I'm going to my kid's game, or I'm training for a marathon, or I'm learning to knit, or whatever it is, right? Because there's a vast number of like ways that you can take care of your well-being. But, especially the senior leaders, they would have kind of the autonomy to do it, and they would do it without saying what they were doing. And that's a missed opportunity, right? Like to say what you're doing, to be open and authentic, that this matters to you, that this is important to you, because that empowers other people to say, okay, if Gret can do it, or if Jen can do it, I can see a way where I can do it, right? And so having leaders really talk about it and be very open and authentic and kind of walking the talk was really important. The other thing that we did was we did a lot of learning and development, like foundational learning and development programs to educate people on, what do we mean by well-being, and what does well-being mean to you in your life, and what are the areas that you think you need to work on or that you want to work on, and how can we support you? I will say that the majority of everything that we did for probably the first 12 to 18 months was a pilot, and so we just tried a whole bunch of things and then, pulsed our people that participated to say, did you like this? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? And made decisions kind of based on that. It was also really important for us, in the very early days, there were a lot of people that are passionate about the topic of well-being. And so we brought those people under the tent with us, right? They were the flag bearers. They were the people that, believed in it, that would give us kind of meaningful feedback about what they needed, what they wanted, what they thought would work, and what they wouldn't, what they didn't want or wouldn't work. And so we were very, we kept very close to kind of that community, which has gone on to, we actually now have a really robust well-being ambassadors community within Deloitte. And an organization our size, leaders can only do so much, but we need people across the organization that take the responsibility and have the passion to say, I'm going to bring this to life on my team, because you can roll out a great number of programs and those can be awesome. But if people aren't feeling it kind of in their day-to-day life, on their team, with the people that they interact with on a regular basis, then sometimes those big programs at the top don't really have an impact. And so it was really important to create this ambassador community that would bring it to the teams, bring it to the offices, bring it to life in the ways, in the places that people were working every single day.
I love that idea of ambassador program. And actually Capri has an ambassador program in Europe, and they're starting one globally. So they're actually recruiting different ambassadors, which is great. And so they'll be looking at the same sort of things I'm sure that your Deloitte ambassadors are doing. It brings up another point about communication and how you actually communicate to the teams, to the population about the programs, and how you get the message out about what you're doing. So how did you look at internal marketing? Granted, you have a marketing background, so that was probably useful.
It was absolutely useful. And so again, I mean, there's multiple ways of doing this. And as I talk about these things, I think it's important to know that, we've been doing this for a few years. And so we didn't do all of this all at once. We kind of built, we built on different things and gained momentum that way. But one of the things that we did do is, in particular, looking at the life cycle of our workforce and what are, what we call moments that matter. And so what are moments that matter in our touch points with our workforce, knowing that they're throughout a given week. I mean, there are probably hundreds of touch points that happen, probably too many, right? We're all overwhelmed with email, right? And so there are so many touch points that happen with our workforce, but what are the critical ones, right? What are the ones that really matter to people? And we started to focus there. And so making sure that, in our milestone programs, when people got promoted, that, well-being was a key component of the learning that took place when they got promoted, making sure that it is part of our performance management process. And so when people have regular check-ins with their coaches and their team leaders, training our coaches and our team leaders how to have real conversations about well-being, which seems, again, very basic, but it was not something that a lot of people were necessarily comfortable with, just asking the question, like, how are you really doing? And it wasn't that they didn't care, it was that they didn't necessarily understand how they could help if somebody said, well, you know what, I'm not doing well, or I have too much on my plate, or I'm overloaded, or I'm overwhelmed, because a lot of those coaches and team leaders were feeling the same way, right? And so how do you have that discussion when you're feeling that way and you don't want to take on something else? And so, training our coaches and team leaders as to like what's available, how do you, you don't have to take that responsibility, but how do you get them to HR or to talent relations or to somebody in the organization that can help them if they do need extra help? And so looking at all of those kind of critical touch points. So through our performance management process, it is embedded throughout all of our learning and development programs. There's not a learning and development program at Deloitte that doesn't have some component of well-being, whether it's a 15-minute well-being break, or whether it's a 2.5 3-hour full-blown kind of learning and development session. And then again, it comes through just in the language that all of our leaders use, right? And every communication, teaching our leaders how to talk about it in a way that, that they're all speaking the same language, so that it doesn't feel like, there's 10 different versions of communications or hundreds of different versions of communications. So, teaching them how to communicate about it, but also how to make it authentically theirs, right? Because we didn't want it to feel like robotic, right? So we wanted people to own the messaging, which was really important as well.
Okay, so let's talk about your book, because you have an amazing new book out, Work Better Together, which I've read in full and in depth and highlighted back to front. I loved it. Can you just take us through a few of the key themes?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as you and I have talked, previously, my co-author on Phillips and I actually set out to write this book prior to the pandemic, and the concepts in the book are, it's really about the impact and the importance of meaningful relationships at work, and the impact that it has on, individual workforce, well-being, as well as the impact to the bottom line. And we look at different ways to kind of dissect organization or team culture and understand what the positive and negative impacts of that culture is. But a good portion of the book, and why we, started kind of to, when we started to write the book, my co-author is a technology researcher. And so for both of us, we were starting to really see and feel and understand the impact that the, technology that is abundant and ubiquitous and kind of everywhere in our life was having on our ability to not just develop, but kind of maintain and sustain meaningful relationships. And so a perfect example is, if you were working in a physical space with somebody prior to the pandemic, or even during the pandemic, right, is, sending somebody that is, 10 feet down the hall in a different office or a different cubicle, sending them an instant message to get something done instead of actually getting up and walking down the hall, which would be good for you and your well-being, but also really good for relationship building, right? We've become very transactional and very tactical in the way that we get work done because technology has facilitated that. Now, don't get me wrong, neither one of us are technology haters, right? But what we talk about in the book is, how do you use technology in a way that benefits, you as a human being and your own personal well-being, but also that it enhances who we are as humans and enhances our ability to develop relationships instead of detracting it. It was really interesting writing this book during the middle of the pandemic because that was a time when all we had to connect us in some cases was our technology, right? And so it did lend a new perspective, or a different perspective than one that we had before. But we dissect, kind of team and organizational culture in the book. We talk about the impact of technology, but we also give a lot of solutions about, okay, how do you go about creating a culture of well-being? How do you use technology for very positive reasons to support your well-being, to augment who we are as humans in the workplace, and what does that look like?
And you've given a great suggestion on a digital detox week, which I definitely am going to try. I also want to talk about leaders and how leaders themselves, obviously we talked about, you've got to walk the talk. What else can they do to really embed well-being more effectively?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing for leaders is take care of yourself, right? I mean, I think leaders tend to, first of all, for those of us that, are working for leaders, sometimes I think we like to kind of point the finger and say, oh, well, they this and they that. I mean, remember that leaders are human too. And that's really important. And so I think for the number one thing for a leader is, you have to take care of your own well-being first. And in the process of doing that, share that, be open about what that looks like for you to the, some people are more comfortable than others. I'm not saying you have to share, gory details of your life, but it is important to, again, role model that. But I would also say, things, because that is probably the most empowering thing that you can do for your team, right? If they see you taking care of yourself and taking action to take care of your well-being, and logging off and being intentional about how you design and schedule your day, and being intentional about how you use technology, and and when you send emails. I mean, for me, a perfect example that I talk about quite regularly is, I used to be that leader that said, hey, when I go on vacation or holiday, I'm going to check my email because that's my own personal style. I don't like to come back to a lot of emails. I find that really stressful. But hey, you team that work for me, I don't have that expectation of you. If you go on holiday or vacation, you don't have to worry about checking your email. And so finally, one day with my team, they were like, you know what, Jen, we hear you and the words that you're saying, but we see you doing something else. And the message that sends is, yes, we believe you that you don't care if we check our email when we're on vacation, but if we ever aspire to be in a role like yours, it seems like the expectation is that we do. Right. And I was like, oh, wow. Oh my gosh. Right. And so like that was a big, huge light bulb for me to say, like, oh, okay, I'm saying one thing, but my behavior is showing something completely different. And so, things that we do now, right? And a lot of this has been a result of the pandemic. We have standard working hours, agreed upon standard working hours on our team. 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. is when we're generally kind of online and available, and we'll respond to one another within a reasonable amount of time. And you can kind of talk about what you think a reasonable amount of time is. Outside of those standard working hours, if something comes up, how do we get in touch with each other? Because if you leave it up to email, everybody feels like they constantly have to be connected to email, right? And so is it text message? Is it picking up the good old fashioned phone? Right? Is it some other collaboration platform that we're going to get in touch with each other? I just came back from vacation myself. So before, preparing, right? Before you go on vacation. So what we did before I went on vacation is, I prepared, the team. We talked about all the things that were going on and anything that they might need to know. And then I did not get a single email from my team. They removed me from all collaboration platforms, copying me. And then the day after I returned, I always schedule kind of a day after I get back from vacation. I don't put anything on my calendar. I'm working, but it's a catch-up day. So the day after that I got back, we had a 2-hour call and they gave me the full debrief. And so what does that do? That allows me to fully disconnect during vacation and not fear FOMO. And it also empowers my team to say, hey, you know what? Jen is out, but she trusts us to do, to get the work done, to do whatever. And that's empowering. And that's a great like development, opportunity for your team to say, hey, I fully trust you to handle whatever happens when I'm out. Right. And they can, and they will, and they rise to the occasion. And the fact that you trust them is really, really powerful. So I would just kind of think about those things, like in terms of, is it, you might have the best intentions of trying to empower your team, but is your behavior and what you're saying actually matching?
I love what you said about actually being able to switch off too, which I think is something important to touch on, because that sort of work ethic needs to also match with a rest ethic in order to be able to be to perform as effectively as you want to. And I'm sure you have lots of conversation with leaders who don't necessarily feel they can switch off. How do you coach them through that?
Yeah. So, well, number one, there is, I love the concept of a rest ethic, and that just really resonates. And I can't take credit for that. That there's a book called Time Off by John Fitch and Max Frenzel, if you're interested. And I recommend it to anyone and everyone that is willing to read it. But that language, again, words matter. It just really resonates with people. And so look, I think there's so much research, right, that says, we live in this constantly connected, over connected world, right? And that's the world that we've kind of chosen to live in, and that's okay. But what technology kind of has done to our kind of our brains and our bodies when we don't disconnect. I mean, it's almost a requirement, right? When you come back, when you are fully refreshed, when you come back after you have disconnected, you're more innovative, you're kinder, you're more creative, like all of the things that we value in the workplace around innovation and creativity don't happen when you're burnt out. They happen when you have disconnected and you're refreshed. And I think for a lot of leaders, what I talk about is like, okay, if you really don't feel like you can completely disconnect for a week or 2 weeks, start to baby step it. Can you give yourself Saturday or Sunday to completely disconnect from your technology? You don't have to do it. For some people, doing it like in one big chunk and kind of ripping the Band-Aid off, that works for them. But like, during the pandemic, there's a lot of organizations that do summer Fridays. I was doing half days on Wednesdays, right? Because I just felt like I needed that that midweek break where I just disconnected from technology for 4 or 5 hours on a Wednesday afternoon, right? And so you can do it in small chunks. Again, it goes back to kind of giving yourself permission and trying it out. I used to be so addicted to my technology before my burnout that, like, after my burnout and kind of really to get past that, I would have to give my husband my phone and have him like change, either lock up my phone or have him change my password for a period of time. Cause that was like and it's really extreme and we laugh about it, but like that was the only thing that would keep me from like that. I would just be bored and I didn't know how to be bored. And I think that's part of it too, is like, we need to like be okay with being bored. We view being bored or not having something to do or not having something in our hands as being lazy, and it's not. Right? Like, we need to, like, when you were a kid and you were bored, you went outside and you built forts and you came up with all kinds of creative stuff, right? Like, it's great to be bored and we need to give ourselves that permission.
That's great. It's funny because my son, when he comes and says, I'm bored, I'm like, just go outside and play. And then he builds a fort. That's exactly what
exactly.
Okay, let's talk a bit about COVID and the hybrid situations. We've got a lot of people starting to get back into an office setting, but it's not what it used to be. It's a mix between working from home and going into an office. What's your view of hybrid work setups and how to stay connected with teams in this new
I personally think that hybrid work is the right answer. I think that it is here to stay. I think that it is what the workforce is telling us in many cases that that they want and that they need. And I think there's many of us, myself included, that I've been itching to get back on an airplane or itching to get back to the office. And it's not so much that I want to get back to the office as a physical space. It's because I want to be with people. It's the human connection that we're missing, right? And so are we kind of misplacing that, or the fact that we want to be with others and connect with others as going back to the office. And so I do think that we are going to, as organizations, have to should rethink the purpose of the office, right? Why are we having people come into the office? Is it truly for collaboration as a team and human connection? And what's really the purpose of the office? I don't know that, in some cases, right, depending on your living situation, you might need to go to the office to actually get quiet, focused work done. But in large part, I think the future of work is, looking at your calendar for the week and saying, okay, what's the type of work that I'm doing and what type of space does that require? And that's actually really good for our well-being. If you can get outside and work outside in a park or on your patio during the day, like, that's fantastic, right? If you are collaborating with others or you do want that human connection, what are the days and what's going on those days that, you should be going into the office or some sort of physical space. And then as an organization, what do we put in those spaces that are going to help our people? Like, what draws them in? Like, what benefits are going to be there? What, beyond just like technology of like, needing a photocopier, right? Or things like that, and kind of access to technology. What are the things that, employers can really do to enhance that office experience that draws people in? But I do think that the office of the future is really largely going to be about human connection and collaboration, as opposed to, a place that we just go to every single day to do kind of focused heads down work, because there's so many other spaces that are a lot healthier for us, quite frankly, that we can be doing that type of work.
Yeah, we actually had someone talk about active design and biophilic design, setting up a really healthy workspace, and creating an environment that's healthy for you to work in, both at home and in the office.
Absolutely.
Okay, and finally, Jen, what are your well-being practices? What are your non-negotiables? What do you go to?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my own personal definition of well-being is eat, move, sleep, and find joy. And so every single day, some days I'm better at it than others, but trying to fuel my body with nutritious foods. That doesn't mean that I don't believe in or I don't indulge in other foods, because there is a time and a place for everything, but making sure that I am fueling my body with some nutritious foods every single day. Movement is really important to me. I'm standing up now. I stand up most of the day, but movement in terms of exercise. I struggle with anxiety. I live with anxiety every day, and exercise is one of the ways that I manage my anxiety. And so exercise is really important to me. Sleep, if you follow me on social media or any other way I talk about it in the book, I am a huge sleep advocate. And that's because I lived a life where I thought, I would sleep when I was dead, and it almost killed me. So I'm a huge, that's a non-negotiable for me. My friends, my family, my coworkers, when we were getting together, prior to the pandemic, we would go out to dinner. If it got close to 8:30, 9 o'clock, my team was sending me to bed. Like, Jen, you need to go back to the hotel room and go to bed, because they know what it's like to work with a Jen that's not well rested. My friends, they know, like, if we're out, I ghost them. I'll just get up. I won't even say goodbye. I'll just get up and leave. It's just like accepted behavior at this point. So I can't underestimate or reinforce the importance of getting good sleep. It is more important. If you do nothing else for your well-being, get more sleep, 7 to 9 hours. So critically important. You will see so many things change in your life. And then finding joy. I just think that in the lives that we live, especially over the last 18 months, if you tune into the 24-hour news cycle, there's just so much negativity out there. And so finding small moments throughout the day, whether it's playing with my dog or watching a funny video or calling somebody that I love, but, just making sure that every single day I'm finding and I'm recognizing those small moments of joy, because I think, life moves so fast. There's so much uncertainty. There's so much negativity that, it's easy to let several days go by without finding joy. And we need that in our lives, and it's so important.
Oh my gosh, so many pieces of information, so much insight for the employee population globally, as well as for leaders. So thank you so much for all of that. It was a great conversation. And I'm sure there'll be great live Q&As in October.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.